to Andersen Acres. We're in the kitchen again tonight, and we are going to be making a biscuit because I like to make biscuits about once a week, but I am making a different type of biscuit. So far I've showed you just a basic baking powder biscuit, and I have showed you a drop biscuit. Well, today I want to do a buttermilk biscuit. These are really rich in flavor, and they most resemble what a lot of people are used to when they were growing up, because buttermilk biscuits were a real thing when we were all kids. So let's get started. The first thing you're going to need is a medium-sized bowl. We're not making a huge batch. And in that bowl, you're going to put half a cup of shortening, margarine, or butter. To be honest, this works best with shortening, but you can use margarine or butter. Use what you have. I'm using shortening because that's what's going to work best in this recipe. But again, butter or margarine will also work. So kind of give that a smush. It should be slightly softened, not too soft, because you do want to be able to cut your fat, whether you're using shortening, margarine, butter, doesn't matter. But you do want to be able to cut your fat into your flour. So what we're going to do is just kind of give that a smush. That is telling me my oven is preheated. While you're smushing your shortening or your butter, preheat your oven to 450 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what mine just preheated to. So now we're going to add 2 cups of flour. Okay, just 2 cups. Kind of give that a little bit of a cut. So you can either use your pastry cutter or just take your fork and kind of just draw that through till you end up getting some chunky pieces of your fat mixed in with your flour. So it starts to become this crumbly mixture. That's what you want. Just kind of give that a little with your fork or your pastry cutter. Someone asked why I'm never using a pastry cutter. It's because I use my pastry cutter all the time and it's in the dishwasher again. So eventually you'll see it on a video when it's not in the dishwasher when I'm filming. But, you know, I'm not going to take it out of the dishwasher. I'm just going to use a fork because a fork works just as well. Okay, there we go. Nice and crumbly. Now to that, we're going to add 3 teaspoons of baking powder. Okay, it's important that that one is baking powder. Give that a smush. Work that around. Then we're going to add half a teaspoon of salt. Okay. Salt. Got to there we go. Okay, half a teaspoon of salt. And here's where our recipe is going to get a little bit different from the basic biscuit. We have here a 1/4 teaspoon baking soda. You do need that baking soda in your buttermilk for a little bit extra oomph for your biscuits. So mix that in. Now our final ingredient, again, is going to be a little bit different than perhaps you've used before. This is buttermilk. If you do not have buttermilk, all is not lost. You're fine. Because what you can do is you can add how much, you know, if you need 3/4 of a cup, which is what we need in this case, 3/4 of a cup of regular milk, either 2% or whole, okay, not 1%. This doesn't work as well as 1%. So fill that up to 3/4 of a cup and add about a tablespoon of vinegar and then let it sit for about 5 minutes because you almost want to curdle your milk. You don't want to leave it sit longer than 5 minutes, but you do want your milk to get kind of curdled. If you don't have buttermilk, you can use a milk vinegar substitute. So you need 3/4 of a cup of buttermilk. However, if you don't have that 3/4 of a cup of milk plus about a tablespoon of vinegar, let that sit for 5 minutes. You've got something that approximates buttermilk. So buttermilk is a lot thicker. Get out. Buttermilk is quite a bit thicker than you might be used to. Okay? If you've not used it before, it's thick. It's nice and thick. So get that mixed in. There you go. If you need to add a little extra buttermilk because it is thicker than a standard milk, you can do that. So once your mixture looks like that, I'm just going to take my ring off. Or not. It doesn't want to come off today because it's humid. So we're just going to scrape that off our fork. Don't need the fork anymore. We are going to take our hands and we're going to just get this into a workable dough. So you're going to have a lot of dry stuff on the bottom and the sides. So you don't want to overwork your dough. You don't want to be here like kneading it for 5 minutes. It's not bread. Okay, but you do want to pick up all these loose pieces. Okay? So roll your dough along the sides and the bottom just to pick up the loose flour, because there will be a bit of it. Even if you tried not to, forks aren't great at incorporating everything, so you'll have some on the bottom. There we go. Don't need that bowl anymore. So we just take that, get all this wet stuff off our fingers. How about that? Now we have this fairly sticky dough. Okay, so it'll be a stickier dough than perhaps you're used to. Kind of just search and see if you have any chunks of flour through your dough. I had a couple. So you just break them up. But again, don't overwork your dough because you want layers. So because you want layers, you don't want to overwork your dough. Now I'm going to recommend you press this with your hand. Okay, with buttermilk biscuits, I do recommend hand pressing instead of taking your rolling pin and squishing the heck out of them. So just hand press. And you can either take bits off in your hand, shape them into biscuits, or you can use a cutter. It doesn't matter. So, here we go. Press that to, between 3/8 of an inch and a 1/2 inch thick, somewhere in there. Just like that. There we go. Or whatever thickness. Remember, they rise. So you can take your cutter. Okay. You'll end up with these chunks on the side. Now these are not going to want to come off, so you might want to use a spatula. So you can take a cutter, if you like, and do it this way. No big deal, right? Let's get some of this out of here. Or you can just form them by hand. I'm going to do a little bit of both. So I'm going to do a couple like this. Squish this back into a ball. It should be sticky enough that it's not difficult to do. Just grab your cookie sheet, which I left on the other side of the kitchen. Just hang on 1 second. Line your cookie sheet with something. These can be sticky. So in my case, I've lined it with my copper liner. And then what you're just going to do, peel these up, place them on your cookie sheet. Okay? Just like so. Okay, it's really, don't mess with them, just pop them on there. It's really quite simple. Now if you wanted to shape them by hand, you can do that as well. You just take off a chunk, okay, and you kind of just put it on your board or your mat. I'm using a silicone mat because there's less sticking, and this is a sticky dough. And you just kind of shape them into the shape you want, okay? Now I do like if my biscuits have their corners touching, but for some reason when I put them on the pan I never do that and I have to move them. So put your biscuits with the little biscuity bits touching each other, okay? Because then they rise up really nicely. So we can just form them by hand as well. These are really easy to form by hand. It's entirely up to you. Do you want a more rustic look or a more streamlined look for your buttermilk biscuits? It doesn't matter. How do you want to do it? Can you not find your biscuit cutter? Is your biscuit cutter in the dishwasher? It happens. So kind of place those on there. And we'll do 2 more. So depending on how big you make your biscuits, you'll get between 8 and 12 out of this recipe. There we go. Nicely formed. And you're going to pop these in the oven at 450 degrees, and you're going to go for at least 8 minutes, as much as 15. So check them at 8. More commonly, they'll be done at 10 minutes, but 12 minutes is common. Sometimes it's 15. It depends how dark you want your biscuits. So that is my plate of biscuits. I formed some of these by hand and some of these I did with the cutter. It really doesn't matter which way you do it, however you feel like doing it. Now we're going to pop these in the oven. I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes, but I'll check them at 8 because you never know. And remember 450? And we will come back and check on these guys as soon as they're baked. Remember, it will take anywhere from 8 to 15 minutes. So be vigilant. You do not want to overcook your biscuits. Alright, so here are our finished biscuits. You see they are slightly browned on the top and they're slightly browned on the bottom. Buttermilk biscuits brown a little bit differently. They almost have a speckly appearance instead of a more uniform brown. That's normal because buttermilk browns differently than regular milk. Now you can see there is a difference between the ones I did with the cutter and the ones I did by hand. So you could shape them either way, it doesn't matter. However you like shaping them, you shape them. But there is a distinct difference. So the reason I use my cutter is you can see the layers. They get really flaky layers in there. They get a little bit less flaky when you do these guys shaped by hand. But there is no right or wrong. You can shape them however you like. This is just my preference. So I hope you enjoyed making buttermilk biscuits here with us today on the farm. And I would like you to try this at home. Get your hands on some buttermilk. They really turn out beautifully. They are delicious. And they are reminiscent of what we all had when we were kids. Because we had buttermilk biscuits a lot when we were children, at least in my area. That's about it for us today. We'll see you tomorrow.